Fluoride has been added to our public water supply for decades as a public health measure to combat tooth decay. Some people are deeply concerned at this mass medication of the population with what is admitted to be a toxic substance. But dentists respond that the tiny doses that individuals receive are entirely harmless and of considerable benefit to dental health. But their response has done little to silence the critics, and what of the hastily withdrawn official report that might have spelt the end of fluoridation? Ethna O'Brien has this report.
We drink it every day without a moment's thought. But the water in our taps contains fluoride, a substance that has been a source of controversy for decades. But is the fluoride in our water a dangerous substance or a genuine boost to public health?
We're unique now, in Europe certainly, in having a law that requires the authorities to administer this medicine to us, whether we like it or not.
Water fluoridation is a safe and effective way of reducing the amount of dental decay that people get.
The most vulnerable point in water fluoridation is the effect on the infant. When things are forming, it is particularly vulnerable to toxic insult compared to when you are fully formed.
And tonight, we examine the full story of the Food Safety Authority report that recommended that babies not be fed formula made with fluoridated water. A report that was withdrawn at the last minute. A common practice across North America and Australia, fluoridation was introduced in Ireland in 1964 to help prevent tooth decay. And it's been a controversial policy ever since. In the 1990s, the British government abandoned plans to add fluoride to public water supplies in Northern Ireland when local communities marched to Stormont to protest. Walter Graham was one of the leaders of that campaign.
This is a choice that you should make, not something that the nanny state should make for you. You can't have them putting drugs in a water system where you take it by thirst. The person who's really thirsty gets more of it than the person who's not so thirsty.
But dentists argue that children in Northern Ireland have lost out because they don't have fluoridation.
There are two studies. There was one done recently which was published in the Journal of Public Dental Health in December 2012, comparing 16-year-olds in Donegal and 16-year-olds in Derry. And it showed that the 16-year-olds in Derry had a 70% increased decay rate to the children in Donegal. And also in 2002, there was the North-South survey done, and that showed that the decay rate in the north of Ireland is greater than the decay rate in the south of Ireland.
But more and more people accept that fluoride is toxic, and the jury is still out about its potential effects. According to the European Scientific Committee report in 2011, it found that limited evidence from epidemiological studies point towards adverse health effects following systematic fluoride exposure, such as carcinogenicity, developmental neurotoxicity and reproductive toxicity. However, the application of the general rules of the weight of evidence approach indicates that these observations cannot be unequivocally substantiated. The report does say that exposure to fluoride is associated with the risk of dental and bone fluorosis.
Fluoride is recognised by both sides of the argument as being a toxic substance, a poison to the human body. It contains arsenic in small quantities, mercury in small quantities, lead in small quantities, nickel in small quantities. All of these are poisonous to the human system, and they're all accumulative poisons that build up over years.
There are studies which show that osteoporosis, thinning of the bones, is higher in fluoridated communities, and that when you get towards the end of your life, the rate of hip fractures has been measured to be twice as high in fluoridated townships in America than in non-fluoridated ones.
But dentists don't believe the level of fluoride in Irish water will damage bones.
In the case of bone, for instance, it's interesting that when they've looked at bone fractures, that they've determined there may well be what's called a U-shaped relationship with it, in that if you've too little fluoride, you get a higher rate of bone fracture, and if you've too much fluoride, you get a higher rate of bone fracture. But in the middle, that there's this area where the rate of bone fracture seems to be quite low. And that seems to coincide around about 1 part per million, which is actually slightly higher than what we have it in the water here.
But fluoride is potentially dangerous. A quarter of a tube of toothpaste can be fatal for a 1-year-old child. But campaigners in favour say that when diluted in our water supply, it's perfectly safe. But as the debate rages, at the centre of this is a report which both sides accept that, if adopted, would have meant the end of fluoridation in Ireland. One key concern is the effect that fluoride in water might have on babies who drink formula milk. Young children can drink 3 to 4 times the amount of water as adults, and their bodies can't excrete it in the same way. This is what the Food Safety Authority set out to examine in 2001. The study, which looked at the risk of dental fluorosis, was carried out for a government forum set up to examine the policy of water fluoridation in Ireland. In a blunt statement in the risk assessment of fluoridated water used to make baby formula, the report found that to avoid babies being overexposed to fluoride, the Food Safety Authority is of the opinion that infant formula should not be reconstituted with fluoridated tap water. Surprisingly, this key finding, despite being peer-reviewed and approved by the Scientific Committee of the Food Safety Authority, never made it into the forum's report and seems to have been withdrawn. In a remarkable memo obtained under the Freedom of Information Act by anti-fluoridation campaigners, Dr. Wayne Anderson said that the Scientific Committee and the board signed off on their conclusions prior to completion of the final document due to time constraints. In a complex explanation, he goes on to say that since then, 2 issues have been raised, and in the time available, it was not possible to address these concerns. Therefore, the risk assessment had to be withdrawn from the forum pending consideration of these concerns. Asked to explain what had happened at an Oireachtas Health Committee hearing, Dr. Wayne Anderson said that some of the Scientific Committee, not at the original meeting, had come forward with concerns, and the report was subsequently withdrawn.
Some of the members who were not present at the Scientific Committee meeting contacted the Food Safety Authority and the chairman of the Scientific Committee and said that basically they didn't feel, having now read the report, bearing in mind that it was quite early, it was given to them quite late in the day, having read the report, they felt that there were some errors in the report and that it didn't necessarily take account of all the science that was there.
The Food Safety Authority declined our request for an interview. In a statement to Primetime, they said that they do not consider that the health of young infants is at risk from the consumption of infant formula, reconstituted with drinking water fluoridated at the statutory limit of 0.6 to 0.8 parts per million. But questions are being asked as to how such an important peer-reviewed report could be abandoned so quickly using procedures that seemed less than clear.
They simply could have took out 5 or 10 days to consider that information, reconvene. There obviously was disagreement, and make the decision at that point, because they've made a decision in the interests of all babies who have been bottle fed since that time, over the last 13 years, and it may have been, I don't know, it may have been the wrong decision.
I don't know what goes through people's mind. I just say that science is a self-correcting process. That if you have a certain amount of information and you're going one way and more information becomes available, you change. That's the nature of science. What I would have thought would be if there was a problem with their final report, it would have been uncovered long before now.
In 2007, John Gormley wrote a report on fluoridation on behalf of the Oireachtas Health Committee examining the issue of water fluoridation. In his conclusion, he found that the manner in which the food safety report was withdrawn was both irregular and suspect and represented a process mess. But this report was never formally adopted.
There are valid questions around the Health Committee back in 2007. What happened there to the report? When John Gormley tried to introduce it to the committee, what discussion took place? I'm not accusing anyone of anything here. The whole thing may have been perfectly legitimate. It wasn't published, so we're very much in the dark, and it's I think those events highlight to me the marked reluctance, and I'm trying to be charitable here, the marked reluctance to discuss this issue.
But since then, a number of scientific studies have raised concerns about the effect of fluoridated water on young children. In 2006, the American Dental Association recommended that babies not be fed with fluoridated water. And in 2011, the European Commission Scientific Committee found that the upper tolerable level for children between 1 and 6 using toothpaste was exceeded when consuming more than 1 litre of water a day.
That's talking in terms of risk of developing dental fluorosis, this staining of the teeth. It's not in terms of any negative health effect, and I think that's very clear in their report.
So in contemporary Ireland, where fluoride toothpaste is commonly used, Is it still justified to fluoridate our water when many concerns remain about this controversial policy that costs the taxpayer almost €5 million a year?
I wish people sometimes would walk a few miles in my shoes. I worked in England for 9 years, up in the north of England, and you want to see the decay that was up there. It was terrible. It's a great health benefit. It really is a great health benefit.
I think a lot more studies now need to be done on the long-term effects of putting this mass substance into drinking water. I think that needs to be studied by our government. I'm asking the government to do that. I think people should be informed about it, and I think people should be given a choice about it.
That report from Ethna O'Brien. And we did ask for the Minister with responsibility for this area, Minister of State Alex White, in order to address some of the issues raised in that report, but he wasn't available.